Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of Broadband World Forum. This morning, I want to talk to you about ADTRAN's vision of bringing the world together, and hopefully that will serve to set you up for what is shaping up to be an exciting day ahead. Hopefully it will give you some insights and thoughts as to what's driving the industry towards a lot of these gigabit frenzies that we heard about yesterday and will continue to hear about today. So as you're walking around, meeting with the different vendors and listening to the other speakers out there, as they start to talk about GFast this and gigabit that and XGS-PON the other, hopefully my talk this morning will just give you some foundation with regard to what the real drivers are behind that, or at least some of the drivers. My name is Ronan Kelly. As mentioned earlier, I'm ADTRAN's CTO for the EMEA and APAC regions. To begin my talk, let's have a think about the world that we live in today. We've got one world, 7 continents, over 190 different countries, over 4,000 different religions, which was a surprise to me, but it's a big number, over 6,500 spoken languages, and with over 7.3 billion citizens. It was interesting. At the end of last year, the number of connected mobile devices surpassed the number of citizens on the planet. And as we begin to move forward into a world of Internet of Things where more and more mobile devices are going to be connected to the networks, that number is going to continue to grow exponentially. So the numbers are large. They're quite staggering. When you think about the networks that have to drive those numbers, it's pretty impressive, the infrastructure that you need to run it. If we look at that world and think back 120, 130 years ago, many of the communities within the world that we live today largely were in isolation. With the exception of the odd colonial invasion that went on, most communities developed autonomously. And that's fundamentally led to the rich tapestry of cultures that we've got around the world today. If you think back, a lot of the infrastructure that we take for granted today that allows us to live the lives that we lead, the road infrastructures, the rail infrastructures, the airline infrastructures, the telecommunications infrastructures. 100 years ago, the bulk of that wasn't in place. It didn't exist. So within a very short period of time, we've moved from a scenario where we were ultimately dependent on horse-drawn transportation along canals and along mud paths into this environment where we now live in this hyper-connected world where everything's available instantaneously. Ultimately, isolation has served to help build a world that is diverse in its cultures. But I think we've learned many, many lessons over the years of how we can be so much more when we come together and bring those cultures together. I felt it was appropriate this morning to bring some cue in with regard to the Rugby World Cup, given the level of activity going on in the country here at the moment with regard to that. But I was looking back at different events that I thought could be relevant to ourselves, and I think the 1995 Rugby World Championship, where we saw the likes of Mandela unite a country that had been separated for so long, using sport as the catalyst for that, and rugby being the sport, and resulting in really what was a fairy tale victory over New Zealand for the South African team. And to quote Mandela, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And if you think about it, if our forefathers were to see what we do today, how we communicate today, even the way our children interact with technology today, what's available instantaneously anywhere around the world, it would look like magic to many of them. So we really have fundamentally changed things in such a short period of time that, you know, for anybody of the older generations, it must look like a very alien place. As we come together and collaborate more, it's bringing huge advances to us as a race. We see increasingly where there's global collaboration to fight things like disease when there are outbreaks, where people can come together either remotely or physically together very, very quickly thanks to the infrastructures that are in place, and they can bring their knowledge to help combat diseases. We've seen in the recent examples with the Ebola outbreaks in Africa, where very quickly they've been able to contain a major outbreak that threatened to wipe out entire communities. And using the collaborative knowledge together of both industry, also educational bodies, charitable bodies as well, they've been able to collaborate and contain the situation down there, but more importantly, very quickly move to a point where we've got candidate vaccines for that deadly virus outbreak. And without that collaboration, these sort of efforts would take much, much longer. And again, if you look back historically, where we've seen massive plagues over the years, where huge portions of the population have been wiped out, we're in a unique position at this point in time in history where our ability to collaborate allows us to really deal with those in a much more efficient fashion. In a similar fashion, we're exploring new frontiers all the time. But those new frontiers are not easy places for us to get to. They're expensive. They require significant expertise and knowledge from across the globe. If we look at the International Space Station as the example, it's been in orbital operation for 17 years now. And that's an exercise that could not have been embarked on by any single country. That's a collaboration of the superpowers around the world bringing their best-in-class engineering and their substantial budgets to bear to allow that facility to exist. And that facility is serving as a research bed for us as a species to allow us to do research that you simply can't do on this planet, where you've got gravitational pulls interfering with the outcomes of your research. You can only do that research in space. And I think we as a species, as we seek to stretch our legs and embark on towards new frontiers, if you listen to all the talk that's coming up increasingly over the last 2 years with regard to missions to Mars, etc., it's a timing issue. We will get there quite soon. It's just a matter of when. And again, that's going to be a collaborative effort. We've got to work together to be able to achieve those lofty goals. We're also understanding more together. If you look at the example here, we've got a snapshot of the CERN Large Hadron Collider. That's a machine, the world's largest and most complex machine, that was designed and built by over 10,000 engineers from 100 different countries. Without that collaboration, it simply would not exist. And the research that's going on there now with scientists from around the world is allowing them to unlock questions of both our origins, but also to understand what's possible within the universe that we exist and where ultimately our destiny is likely to take us as well as a species. We're also experiencing more together. If we look at all the different ways that we have available to us of communicating, who in the audience remembers, back around towards the end of the .com era, when video conferencing was going to end the airline industry? Nobody was going to travel on business travel anymore. We were all going to video conference. Airline travel would purely be the preserve of, vacation time. And I'm pretty sure nobody in the audience predicted that the thing that would really move the needle with regard to video conferencing usage was our children doing FaceTime with their friends and their family, etc., free of charge. I'm 99% certain nobody predicted that. I certainly didn't see that one coming. It's how we're choosing to use these technologies don't always manifest themselves in the way that people originally envisaged them. If we look at the snapshot we've got on the screen there, we've got somebody using one of the Oculus virtual reality headsets. And we're really on the cusp of a new era there, a new era for education, for communication, for entertainment. If you look at Oculus and visit their website and take a look at Story Studio. Story Studio is kind of a sidearm. They don't talk too much about it in Facebook and Oculus. Oculus was acquired by Facebook, for those that are not familiar with that situation. But Story Studio is fundamentally reinventing how we consume video content, how we consume movie content. It's focusing on turning inside out how you produce movies. They're looking towards producing movies that not only provide a 360-degree environment that people can have that immersive experience, but they're also producing movies that allow people to interact with that movie. So whether it's a fly flying around in front of your face that you swat away and it moves, it reacts to that, or whether it's a multi-storyline movie like Pulp Fiction or something like that, that you, immersed in that movie environment through your VR-controlled environment, can choose which storyline you want to pursue within that movie environment. So it'll allow for scenarios where you could have an audience like this watching a particular movie and every one of you walking out with a completely unique experience, which is completely new. This has never been possible before. What it'll do for retail as well, we see some of the advertisement companies now jumping all over virtual reality. There's billions of dollars being pumped into it. And when you think about the bandwidths and the low latency requirements that virtual reality is going to depend on for it to be successful, it has big implications with regard to the network as well. Ultimately, as a species, we're living longer, thanks to developments in healthcare and better understanding of how to lead healthy lives. But we're also, through social media, sharing more and more about what we do in those lives. And it's creating this snowball effect as we see our friends, parachuting out of planes or scuba diving or whatever. It encourages us, it spurs us on that we realize that we can do more than just sitting at home and watching TV on the sofa. And ultimately, that's driving us to share those experiences more. And if we look at the evolution in camera technology over the last 5 years in particular, anybody who's buying the latest iPhone 6S, you've now got a camera in your pocket that records 4K video, ultra high def video. Whether you want to or not, it's doing it for you. So quite often, a lot of the changes in behavior are not necessarily driven by the consumers themselves. They're driven by the manufacturers that produce the products that the consumers use. So when we're trying to anticipate changes in bandwidth usage, etc., it's important not just to look at the consumers. You need to look slightly further down the food chain on that side of things. I think ultimately now, today, we're increasingly capturing in 4K our video content. If you look at all the latest GoPro cameras, all the top-end ones are all 4K. But what we're going to start see coming through quite quickly now is the ability to capture in 360-degree content that's suitable for use in virtual reality headsets. Those cameras are already there today. They're a little bit expensive at the moment, but that's a cost curve issue. They'll come down that cost curve very, very quickly as demand starts to ramp up for that. So again, the bandwidth requirements that will be required to upload those files will be significantly larger. But increasingly, we're not satisfied with just uploading static content. Quite often we want to share that experience as it happens real time. So we want to stream that content. And particularly in an environment where you've got virtual reality capability, where I can have friends dotted around the world that can be embraced in that environment that I'm in at that moment, and they can see everything that I have available for me to see as well. But that requires me streaming potentially up to 6x4K video feeds for them to be able to have a proper experience with that. So you can very quickly see where bandwidth starts to become a real challenge in that environment. And latency is critical as well. For VR to work properly and for people not to suffer from motion sickness, you really need low latency connections. We're communicating more together. It's scary. I had a list written down of the different apps that people use to communicate today, and to be quite honest, it just grows every day of the week between WhatsApp and Skype and Snapchat and Viber and you name it. It's a very, very long list. I think for me, though, the ones that really kind of stick out on how it helps bring the world together, but ultimately how it leverages the network and the cloud infrastructure to do that. If you look at the likes of Google Translate or the new Skype real-time translation activity that's going on there, you've now got a scenario where people can immerse themselves in an environment that's totally outside of their native tongue and still get by. They can still understand, they can read menus, they can read literature, but also they can communicate a call with somebody on the other side of the world using two completely different native languages, and the cloud will translate for them. That's hugely powerful. For those of you in the audience who have children, I've got small kids, 7 and 10. I'm busy with my wife plotting out what subjects they're going to do in secondary school, what languages they need to learn as part of their criteria. When the reality is, by the time they graduate and come out into the real world, a lot of this technology will have negated the need for them to learn that in the first place. So very different times that we're living in. So connected countries, connected cities, connected communities, connected individuals, and now increasingly connected things. We live in truly amazing times. And amazing times require amazing innovations. Can I ask for a show of hands, who in the audience has a tablet device, whether it's Android or whether it's an iPad or whatever? Even within the household, maybe you don't have one yourself, but within the household. It's pretty much everyone. If I had asked you that question 5 years ago, the answer would have been 0. Think about that. In less than 2,000 days, we've gone from 0 to ubiquity with coverage of something that's arguably an expensive device that everybody has ran out and bought. If we think about how quickly innovation is impacting the industry that we work in, think about it in the context of anything that can be digitized. There's now a global digital distribution network that for whenever somebody comes out with the next killer app, the next thing that people really latch onto, the next big hit, historically we used to measure success in the time it took to get to 50 million users of a particular product. And in the early days with radio, that took 43 years, and TV took 13 years, and it's been coming down the cycle very quickly. In this digital world, we're now counting that in months. It's only a timing issue before that comes down to weeks. So people building their business models and stuff, you really have to keep your eyes peeled as to what's coming over the hill, because when it does come over the hill, it comes very, very quickly these days. There's a quote there from Tim Berners-Lee: "The web as I envisage it, we still have not seen it yet. The future is still so much bigger than the past." And that's so true. We're really just scratching the surface at this point. The foundation that we're building upon now is so large. The knowledge that's there, the capability that's there, the infrastructure that's there, the potential is absolutely massive. But we've got to ask ourselves, what does the future network need to look like to really continue to spur on that growth, to spur on that innovation? From ADTRAN's perspective, our belief is that the network needs to be built on fiber foundations. Does that mean it has to be a ubiquitous fiber-to-the-home network? No, it doesn't. Ask yourself a question. If you ever go out and buy a new television set or a new stereo for your house, or even a new computer for your house, do you ever question whether the electrical feed into your house has enough capacity to power that thing? No, we don't. We all assume we've got infinite electricity feeds into the house. The reality is we don't. But the perception is that we do, because we never hit the limits. There's enough capacity there. There's talk at the show about gigabit this and 2 gigabit that. In my view, the reality is we need to get broadband to the point where it doesn't matter anymore. It's like the electricity. People don't hit the sides with it anymore. It unlocks the capability that people have. What that limit is depends on the users, but there needs to be enough capacity within the system. So the fiber needs to be deep enough within the network, and then whatever the last medium is, whether it's wireless, whether it's copper, whether it's coax, that it has enough capacity to deliver on that user experience. If we look in the industry that we play in recent years, the data center industry has moved into a much more software-defined set of capabilities. It has the ability to spin up resources in very, very quick time and in an on-demand basis. If you look at most of the service providers around the world today, some of their biggest competitors who are taking their premium revenues away, whether it's Netflix taking TV content away, whether it's Skype or other over-the-top voice services taking voice revenues away, they all operate in data center environments. They have the ability to bring new products to market in weeks. Versus if we look at some of the larger telcos around the world, it can take them anything up to 18 months to introduce a new product into their network by the time they get all the systems ready to be able to deal with that. That doesn't work anymore. And increasingly, there's acceptance within those larger operators, and it's trickling down to the smaller guys as well. They need a better way of doing things. They need to be able to take advantage of these data center infrastructures that are out there. And also on the consumer side of things, everybody's familiar with Siri on their iPhone, and we've seen the new Amazon Echo as well. There's a whole raft of consumer products being brought to the market that are augmented by the cloud. They look very clever, they feel very clever when we interact with them, but the reality is they're dumb as bricks. All the cleverness is up in the cloud. So you need that capability within the network. So as those devices, as they're interacting with us, they have the ability to signal for more capacity or signal for lower latency, so that end user quality of experience is preserved. The networks themselves have to be self-optimizing and fault-tolerant. If you talk to any major carrier around the world today, number one on their criteria is trying to reduce their OpEx cost and also trying to reduce the time it takes to introduce new products to market. It's a huge challenge for them. They're hemorrhaging revenues to the over-the-top guys who are a lot more flexible, a lot more agile than they are, and they need to be able to react to that. The networks themselves need to assist them on that front and bring that fault tolerance and self-manageability to the fore. And above all, the networks need to be built on open infrastructures. The days of service providers embracing systems that come with strong proprietary lock-in and really restrict their ability to bring new services to the market in a timescale that the carrier needs, as opposed to a timescale that's dictated by the vendor's development cycles. Those days are gone. Carriers will not tolerate that going forward. The big carriers have recognized the potential that exists in the open source world. They've recognized some of the gains that have been brought to bear from the software-defined networking movements within the data centers, and they want to realize those gains within their networks as well. To quote Linus there, the carriers, if they want to be truly in control of their own destiny, they have to build and leverage open infrastructure to take advantage of that. Ultimately, the network needs to empower the users. It needs to put them in control. It needs to let them drive. It needs to let them create and produce. Ultimately, the network needs to get out of the way and stop blocking. We're seeing it consistently, whether it's C-Spire's gigabit or Silicon Valley of the South in Mississippi, or whether it's Blue Networks in Kansas. Gigabit networks are enabling communities and connecting lives. They're improving the quality of life for people in the neighborhoods that they are being made available to, and they're also improving everything from reduction of congestion on the roads because more people are teleworking to improvement of the lifestyle for the users of the services. And I think we as an industry, it's incumbent that we continue to strive to push those higher bandwidth services. As I said earlier, whether it's 500 meg, 1 gig, 2 gig, in my opinion, it doesn't matter. It's so long as it's enough, so long as it doesn't get in the way anymore. So to wrap up, our message from ADTRAN is to embrace the future network and bring the world together. Thank you very much.